All right, the big goodbye. See, of the various TNG episodes, this one, while it's an interesting story, is obviously one of the ones that they made as a way to skimp on the budget because, as we know, they had a season-long budget for making the show, and if one episode cost twice as much as another, then that's fine. And this is one of the less expensive ones. How do we know that? Well, I mean, the main plot point of the episode, or the starting plot point, I should say, is an alien race called the Jurata, which are potentially hostile bug people who the Federation sent Picard to negotiate with, and who expect a prompt and precisely courteous greeting in a formal manner, or they'll be unhappy and maybe, just kill everyone on the Enterprise. That's ominous. Yeah, that basically goes nowhere. It's literally there as an excuse to create tension. Like, the possibility of the Jurata killing everyone is literally the only reason why Picard has any reason to hurry with getting out of the holodeck. He can't delay the meeting with the Jurata. If he tries, the Jurata will kill him, or try to anyways. And such a thing would mean that his mission was a catastrophic failure, even if he does live. So then we get to the side tangent, which is the majority of the entire episode. See, Picard decides to relax for a little bit while they're flying to meet the Jurata, and goes to watch a Dixon Hill holodeck program. Which, those honestly aren't all that rare in Next Generation. Several of the TNG episodes are based on it. Oh yeah, here. The reason why the holodeck malfunctions, by the way, it has something to do with a Girardin long-range probe. And, oh yeah, the Girardins are only willing to speak to Picard, no one else. Everyone else is a mere subordinate, and thus unworthy of being discussed. Why is it like this? And the whole thing is just... Oh yeah, another thing. There is actually a later episode that mentions them. Samaritan Snare mentions that the Packlet ship Mondor had pieces of technology on board it that matched Girardin technology. How did the Packlets get that? Yeah, that's not important. The writers didn't care either. Anyway, though, back to the holodeck. It's a pretty cool looking thing because it's set in real world Earth, so they can just use standard movie sets instead of Star Trek sets, and people wearing, real clothes instead of Star Trek costumes, which probably saved them a lot on production costs. As for the actual mission, though, well, see, this isn't the Sherlock Holmes one. This is Dixon Hill. So, Dixon Hill is a crime drama in San Francisco. Picard has to solve the crime drama and get the holodeck to let him out in time for the meeting with the Jurata. Again, as part of the holodeck safety protocols going offline, all of the holodeck programs or people become sentient and self-aware and start acting like they know, like they're supposed to be real people and not just holodeck programs, which of course makes the whole thing kind of ethically icky, especially when two of them decide to leave the holodeck and kind of sort of delete themselves. Um, yeah. It's not a particularly complicated episode. It really isn't. You have this thing, which in theory is a B plot, which takes up the majority of the episode, which is just Picard running around the holodeck talking to various characters. And of course, because of there's the whole like you're not real holodeck, you're holodeck characters, unless you're not real people aspect to this. Having the holodeck characters think about what that means enrages them and makes the problem worse. Yeah, this is one of those episodes, and it gets really, really deep into the weeds on that. So much so that we actually have this line at the end where Dixon Hill is like, oh, no, wait, no, Lieutenant McNary, sorry. Oh, right, that's right. Picard is playing the role of Dixon Hill. So for in character purposes for the holodeck novel, uh, Picard is Dixon Hill, and thus the other characters can't be Dixon Hill. It would be interesting to have Picard have a holodeck glitch where the role of Dixon Hill actually gets played by a holodeck character, and Picard is like, wait a second, I'm supposed to be Dixon Hill. And thus everyone treats him as an imposter, which would probably sideline the story completely and mess things up beyond belief. Anyway, though. So, using this in a TTRPG, the whole thing with the Girata, that is actually such a simple plot element that you could use that for almost any story. It's like, oh, we are going to X location for Y diplomatic meeting and blah, blah, blah. The stuff about the Girata being semi-hostile and thus potentially capable of killing the crew of the Enterprise, you could take that or leave it. It is a valid plot point, a method to add tension to the story. But, you know, if it fits your story, use it. If it doesn't fit your story, don't use it. It's very optional. Now, of course, if you want to add tension, there's a variety of other reasons to add tension. Like in the Bars and Wormhole episode, the source of tension was actually in the idea that the Bars and Wormhole, due to being a unique natural resource, whoever has possession of it has possession of a natural resource that would be of great benefit to the United Federation of Planets, and thus all of the people in the Federation would be, well, better off if Picard was successful in his negotiations to acquire it, and thus the tension is in the question of whether or not one of the other parties at the negotiations would be successful in convincing the Barzan to make a deal with them instead. Now, that is not necessarily a form of tension that gives you a time crunch, but it could. Because if you're late to the negotiations, and the people doing the negotiations decide they like the offer of the person who wasn't late to the negotiations, well then, they might decide to conclude the negotiations on time, and thus skip you. Well, hey, you know what? You just failed. And that is something you could do as a alternate method of adding tension to diplomatic negotiations. diplomatic negotiations aren't necessarily a one-on-one matter. In the case of the bars and wormhole, if I remember right, there was a grand total of 5 parties at those negotiations. The Barson, who were selling the wormhole, Picard, representing the Federation, a group of Ferengi, obviously representing the Ferengi Alliance, the Caledonians, who are a race we've heard almost nothing about ever, and of course that part Betazoid guy who was representing a race that weren't able to appear in person because they're non-humanoids. Yeah, that was a thing. Oh yeah, that particular non-humanoid race. We never saw them ever, and don't really know anything about them. Other than the fact that they had him as their negotiator because he was good at doing negotiations, and they found it to be more economical than actually attempting to negotiate by themselves. Anyways, though, so yeah, if you're going to use the diplomacy angle, there's a variety of ways you can do that. You don't need to do the, literal deadline approach. Anyways, though, for this episode, the majority of the episode is just Dixon Hill's story, where, quite frankly, taking the Dixon Hill story as presented in this episode and making a TTRPG version of it, the players would probably go off script so fast that they wouldn't realize what the narrative that they're supposed to be playing even is, and thus they wouldn't necessarily even notice. Also, if you were to just rename it so that it doesn't actually have the name Dixon Hill, and follow the plot beats of the Dixon Hill story, it's entirely possible that only people who were like uber super nerds who had actually memorized the plot of the Dixon Hill holonovels would even notice. Because, again, the Dixon Hill name is what most fans would use as a reference point. So if you don't give them that, then, oh, well, as a, sort of like crime drama sort of thing, it's pretty standard stuff. I mean, it's set on Earth using, what is, by modern standards, archaic Earth technology, and thus not something that would actually be all of that complicated to write, as long as you're just doing a police drama. Oh, well. Yeah, that's about that. I'm not someone who's actually big on holodeck episodes, although if you want to do a procedurally generated bottle episode for TTRPG game, a holo novel is actually a great way to do that, because for in-universe reasons, the holo novel can be randomized. Yeah, that's a thing that has happened in Star Trek. So, for in-universe reasons, the party playing the holo novel doesn't necessarily need to be able to guess what's going to happen next, or even have a logical basis of guessing it. And that's an interesting point there, is that if you want to add tension to completing the holodeck adventure quickly, that is actually as simple as making out the thing so that you can have a different source of tension. Because, like, the whole thing with the Gerada possibly blowing up the Enterprise, yes, that's a lot of tension. However, it's a very specific source of tension. Now, if it's a sort of negotiations, it's entirely possible that you might do something akin to the game from, oh, I forget. There's that episode where Data plays some digital board game with I forget who the guy was. And well, you could have a holodeck adventure where, for an in-universe perspective, the players that are actually playing the holodeck adventure are trying to beat the clock or complete the adventure faster than another team somewhere else in a different holodeck who's playing the same adventure. And thus, you add as the source of tension, oh, if you lose, your mission is a failure. You're not necessarily going to die, but, whoever arranged this test is going to decide that the other guys won and the other guys get the prize instead of you. Now, what that prize is, there are so many possibilities you could put in there that I couldn't even begin to list them. I mean, I've mentioned a few things that have been done previously. I mean, like the Jaradan thing was actually just diplomatic negotiations because the Federation wanted to have a friendly relationship with the Jarada. The thing with the Barzan wormhole was the Federation wanted to have a stable wormhole as a method of exploring the galaxy, and so on and so forth. We don't need a specific one for a situation like that, just to add tension to a holodeck story. You just need to get things done. You don't actually, and one of the things that is notable about that one I mentioned with having it be a contest, with that one, you don't need the idea that the holodeck is malfunctioning. Having the holodeck malfunction being the cause of problems is the single most overused trope with holodeck-related stories, and quite frankly is something that I would personally avoid doing in a TTRPG because holodeck malfunctions are just that dumb most of the time. Like I said, the holodeck's working fine. It's just that you have a reason you need to complete the holodeck thing. I mean, like, heck, you could conceivably put in something where some data is hidden somewhere in the holodeck program, and then people are playing the holodeck program to find the information. And since they're not sure what the information actually is, attempting to just crunch the code for the holodeck novel is theoretically possible, but not necessarily workable. At any rate, that's about that. Interesting idea, not necessarily one that I would go with, but hey, the basic holodeck novel idea is one of the most versatile plot elements you could go with, because of the fact that it's, for in-universe reasons, literally a fantasy world, and thus you can make up whatever you want. At any rate, see you next time.